Hey the Emperors, welcome back to my channel. And if this is your first time here, thank you so much for joining us today. Please make sure to let me know if you like this content by leaving a like, subscribing, and making sure you gently caress that notification bell. So today we're getting into the paranormal. So my family, much like many other families in this area, has a history with the paranormal. So I wanted to do a series dedicated to those stories and those memories. So I'm going to start by going through the stories of my grandparents, then my parents, and then my own personal lived experience. So let's hop right in. So my maternal grandfather lived quite a life. He was born in the Depression and was the product of a sexual assault. His mother raised him and his other siblings up until she died when he was around 10. He wound up raising the rest of his family and started a business and had 6 children and quite a few grandchildren before he passed, and all in all, turned his life really far around. However, there was another part to his life that he didn't mention to many. You see, my grandfather, John, he could see things that others couldn't. He could sense other presences that were just simply not visible in the room. It's a gift he and I have in common. During the Depression, especially in this area of the country, he and his family, like many families, needed to move just about every week. They were staying with people who hadn't been completely decimated by the economic situation. They began staying in a house with this woman who said that her husband had recently abandoned her. And the owner of the home, who my grandfather isn't quite sure of the name of, she left them alone. So in the house was my great-grandmother, my grandfather, and his 5 siblings. On the first night, everything seemed to be fairly normal, except my grandfather said that very first night, there was faint sounds of walking downstairs, even though everyone in the house was upstairs. He thought nothing of it and went back to sleep. Over the next couple of days, these things got worse at night. He would begin to hear doors opening in the middle of the night on their own, and every day the owner of the home would come back, taking more of her personal belongings out of the home. And every night he would hear footsteps coming up the stairs from downstairs, and he believed that someone was in the house. He said he would hide under the covers and wait for it to pass, even as whatever it was or whoever it was opened the door and stared in. On the 6th night of them being in the home, everyone in the house was awakened by some of the loudest sounds they had ever heard. It sounded as if every cabinet had its door ripped off the hinges, every plate and bowl smashed, and every single pot and pan hit up against the walls until they shattered. My great-grandmother and my grandfather and his siblings all ran down the stairs, trying to get out of the house. All he knew was he needed to leave and that something was wrong. When they got downstairs, everything was dead as night, peaceful. Nothing had been touched. All the dishes were up, not broken. All the cabinets and pantry were pristine. My great-grandmother assured my grandfather and all of his siblings that everything was okay and it was time to go to bed. My grandfather went back to bed, and he told me that that night all he heard was a lot of footsteps pacing back and forth, and the occasional hit. It sounded as if someone was punching a wall. He knew that whoever or whatever was here was absolutely furious. On the next morning, the owner of the home came back. My grandfather awoke to my great-grandmother and the owner of the home arguing outside. He heard his mother tell the owner of the home what happened, and the owner of the home told her that she needed to leave. She wanted her gone. My great-grandmother was incredibly worried. She didn't have anywhere else to go. Her and her 6 children would be homeless, so she decided to stay. That afternoon, the owner of the home brought the sheriff to the house and forced my family to leave. My grandfather, who at age 7 was already used to being homeless, was so thankful to be out of that home because he knew whatever was there was absolutely malevolent and wanted them gone. A few days go by and they had found someone else to stay with. And then my grandfather heard my great-grandmother gasp as she was reading the paper. It was a picture of the home they had been staying in. A photo was shot of it the day after they left of the house engulfed in flames. But that wasn't what made my grandmother, my great-grandmother, scared. As she read the article aloud to my grandfather, she revealed that the owner of the home, her husband, was dead, and his corpse was found under the porch, and she, the owner of the home, was arrested on charges of his murder and arson. What's more disturbing is the woman claimed that she did not set the fire, and everyone was gone from the home. My grandfather told me that the husband, that he had been murdered, and he was angry that his home was being rented out, and he set it on fire so his corpse could be discovered. My grandfather had a number of other things happen to him in his life that were paranormal. However, he wasn't able to pass on a lot of these stories to me as he passed away when I was pretty young. He told me several stories of a recurring paranormal incident that happened to him fairly often throughout his teens. Like many people at the time in our area, he wasn't quite young enough to be drafted into the war. However, he was old enough to need to work. Oftentimes when he was on the way back to where he and his family were staying at the time, he would suddenly hear the sound of a horse walking behind him. In our area of the country, that wasn't uncommon at the time. However, every time he would turn around, the road was empty. There was nothing behind him. Even as he tried to walk quicker, he could feel the eyes of the horse staring at him. He could feel the breath coursing down his neck. Every night, over the course of 3 years, he would have to run home to avoid whatever this was. It never completely caught up to him, but it was always just out of reach. No matter how many times he looked back, brought a flashlight, none of it mattered. Every time he turned around, it wasn't there. But the moment his eyes faced forward, he could hear it behind him, getting closer and closer, staring at him with intent. He never discovered what it was. He just knows that when he left the area, that was it. Most families have a couple of sides, so my family has two. So there's my mother's side and my father's side. On my father's side, not many people want to open up about their experiences that they've had with paranormal. My grandfather on that side, he's since passed on, but he had several experiences. The homes that he lived in throughout his life were active. However, he refused to acknowledge it. So unfortunately, the only record I have of anything paranormal happening is through the eyes of my father. My grandfather lived in a house that was out in the woods in a very small backwoods community, but his closest neighbor was about a mile away at the time. Eventually, him and his children from a previous marriage and my grandmother and her children from a previous marriage settled on living in the house that his parents had built several years prior. They had both died in that house. The moment my grandmother moved in, things started to get weird. Doors opening and closing on their own, windows opening on their own, seeing people walk down the hallway, hearing footsteps, even if no one was home. Eventually, my grandparents had my father. He was the last of 12 children to be in that home. Now, as you can imagine, they were a bit cramped for space, so they slept upstairs in bunk beds. My father proceeded to tell me that every night, regardless of what phase of the moon it was or anything, if he did not close the door to the downstairs, every night there would be people pacing up and down the stairs, despite every single person in the house being in their beds. My father told me several stories of being a teenager and coming home late and seeing what he thought was his father sitting in the living room in the darkness. And for those of you that don't live in a rural community, when I say it was dark outside, I mean it was dark. There was no street lights, no light pollution from the nearby towns, nothing. They were truly in the woods, in the darkness. And my father told me stories of seeing a silhouette of a man sitting in the living room with a lit cigarette. He was just able to make out the burning tobacco at the end of the cigarette. He would ask, "Dad, what are you doing up?" And it would always be about that time that he would hear his father snoring in the room that was next to the living room. This apparition never harmed anyone, it just was there. My father experienced a lot of paranormal activity in that home. I have experienced a lot of paranormal activity on that property. I look forward to telling you about it in the second video and the third video of this series. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this very brief intro into the paranormal history of my family. If you liked it, please let me know by leaving a comment below, leaving a like. Let me know in the comments below if you and your family have a history like this, or if there are certain gifts that have been passed down through the generations. Make sure to subscribe so you can see the next installments of this, and make sure to hit that notification bell so you know when they drop. Or follow me on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!